professionals who understand the international challenge of school feeding, and we're looking to provide answers. We believe nutritionists have a special role to play in school feeding. We have technical knowledge, understanding, and experience in the field of nutrition. We're organised around a defined set of core competencies and curricula. For example, in the UK, the Association for Nutrition is the custodian of our curricula for nutritionists. This is underpinned by strong science and an evidence base supported by various nutrition societies. And we're engaged as a group to address the problem of school feeding. The current situation is there has been much done to identify the importance of school feeding. However, we need data to make rational decisions. We need data around three aspects. Firstly, safety relating to the quality of food, quality assurance relating to the consistency. Secondly, we need to ensure coverage of appropriate programs. What percentage of schools in Ghana, Burkina Faso, or Pakistan have a schools feeding program? What percentage of children are covered? And how do we know that we have adequate coverage? Further to this, we need data on monitoring and evaluation to inform ongoing work streams. And we need sustainability and to build resilience into the system. So we believe we have validity to support this space. We are already in the process of creating a specially trained nutrition professions workforce. We have a plan for establishing and developing capability and capacity for relevant professionals, for problem identification and solving at local and national level. We seek to achieve this through a dedicated, specifically trained schools nutrition extension officer role. Who will integrate, communicate, and deliver on school feeding with a focus on the nutritional perspective. The development of this is supported by nutrition professionals and resources from nutrition societies, such as the Nutrition Society UK, the International Union of Nutrition Scientists, and the African Nutrition Society. In order to achieve this, we need the engagement of stakeholders and to lobby government agencies to appreciate and support the training of nutrition professions to strengthen the nutrition workforce. Against this backdrop, we have a number of short presentations. First of all, Francis will characterize the need. Robert has outlined the special interest group engaged to make this happen. Gilbert and Charlotte are providing examples of community and nationally based experiences. Hibba will discuss behaviour change. We will then have a short Q&A session, followed by conclusions presented by Professor Alan Jackson. Francis.
Thank you so much, Professor Elahi. Now, it is important to note that school feeding programs are important for the development of school-age children, especially those in developing countries. Basma, the next slide, please. Now, we do realize that quality control is critical for monitoring and evaluating progress and impact on any program. Therefore, a standardized quality assurance framework is essential to assess program outcomes. Next slide. So what did we do? We conducted a baseline information on country-level school feeding programs across 17 countries in Africa. This was done to facilitate the development of quality assurance framework process in Africa. And in our survey, we assessed current food consumption and dietary practices in our schools. We needed to identify a context-relevant intervention and policy to promote healthier diets. Next slide, please. What did we learn from this study? In our current situation across Africa, the school feeding program is not data-driven to make rational decisions so as to set the policies and legal framework on school feeding. There are gaps in diet data because not enough widespread collection of data among countries exists. There is no focus on the collection of dietary data on marginalized groups, for example, children, adolescents, women, from deprived neighborhoods. There isn't much consumption of locally available foods. And there is too much reliance on external donor funding, making it difficult for coverage, safety, consistency of school children being fed with adequate meals. Next slide. So what lessons did we learn from this? There is the need for the development of a standardized quality assurance framework to monitor school-based feeding programs across the African continent. And this will be a useful strategy to ensure not just quality, but also value for money. This will also ensure a standardized tool for trained professionals to measure the outcome of these programs. It will also ensure a synchronized and standard period or time frame for evaluating the outcomes of these programs. Next slide. Our recommendation, therefore, is to mobilize trained and capacitate nutrition extension officers with oversight from the African Nutrition Society, farmers, and other NEPAD to do the following: to gather credible data, extend coverage to hard-to-reach communities, and to promote behavior change in our schools, families, and communities, particularly on the consumption of locally available foods. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity for me to present on behalf of my team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. So in my presentation, I will draw evidence from recent World Food Programme review on school feeding in Sub-Saharan Africa. And the aim is to highlight or share some of the challenges that were identified in the review, but also to demonstrate why we need to do something about it. Then I'll talk briefly about the opportunities the Special Interest Group on School Health and Nutrition provide us as nutritionists to address these challenges. Next slide, please. So in 2021, the World Food Programme conducted a review with two key aims: to understand the health and nutrition situation of school children and adolescents in Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa to be specific, and two, to assess the impact of health and nutrition interventions, including school feeding interventions. Now, the review found that school feeding programs are present in many countries in Africa, and this is further supported by data from the recent global survey on school meals, which revealed that 39 out of 41 African countries that were included in the survey implement school feeding programs. So this is good news, right? However, the challenge is that coverage of school feeding programs in this continent remains low, and the Global School Meal Survey reports an average coverage of 23%. Now, beyond this coverage, the World Food Programme review found that school meals provided to children in many African countries are poor in quality, and this poses as a concern to parents whose children are benefiting from school feeding. The review further identified a lack of policies or legal framework to guide the design and implementation of school feeding programs in most African countries. Now, out of the 46 Sub-Saharan African countries, only 9 countries have policies and legal framework that support school feeding implementation. And some of these policies are not school feeding specific policies. They are mostly embedded into national nutrition policies or national education policies. Now, ineffective monitoring and evaluation of school feeding programs implementation was also reported in this review. And because of the lack of monitoring, most countries record no data for us to really understand the overall impact of school feeding programs. Now, low community support and participation in the design, implementation, and monitoring of school feeding was also cited. But importantly, and which is very, very relevant to our discussion today, is capacity challenges at all levels, including insufficient human and technical resource capacities for school feeding, weak institutional arrangement to support school feeding, and also there is an ongoing challenge of achieving national ownership of school feeding programs. Next slide, please. Now that we know this, what can we do as nutritionists and professionals working in nutrition to address these challenges? Now, the Special Interest Group for School Health and Nutrition was established in May 2022 by the Nutrition Society. And you can read details about this in the Nutrition Society website. Now, the ambition of the SIG is to achieve a situation where every child is assured of a quality meal at school on a daily basis, with an emphasis on those who are most underprivileged. The SIG provide us with a unique opportunity to organize ourselves as nutritionists and people working in nutrition to mount a response in addressing the challenges that I have identified. Now, working as a group, we will be able to identify any limitations in the provision of services through supporting operational research and problem solving. We will be able to support the work of others such as the Global Consortium for School Health and Nutrition and nutrition societies across the world. For example, the Nutrition Society in Africa, the Asian Nutrition Society, and all this will help us to generate context-specific evidence. We will be able to advocate for the prioritization and development of school feeding-specific policies and for government to scale up school feeding to benefit more children. And finally, the SIG will provide us with an opportunity for us to support the work for our government and identify and work with relevant international bodies to address the capacity challenges, such as skills improvement training for school health and nutrition professionals, more specifically on school nutrition extension officers, which is our priority. So this is just what I wanted to share with you. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, Robert, for laying the foundation for the challenges and opportunities that school feeding programs offer. My presentation will simply draw inspiration from the work that I've been able to carry out, the research in Malawi, and how the research is informing what we're carrying out in Cameroon. Next slide, please. To begin, it's good to underscore that homegrown school feeding program, which is a very important component that most national governments in the global south are embracing now, is not a one-size-fits-all because we have a cross-section of models that are running across. And in my presentation, I will briefly just talk about two, which is the grants-based model that is driven by local procurement practices, and we have the community-based model, which is highly driven by the community and even the national governments. Next slide, please. Talking about the two different models which characterize primarily the homegrown school feeding practice, it will be important for us to look at the grants-based model. What are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of this model? Remember, I highlighted it is not a one-size-fits-all, and what we need is the appropriation process to be able to determine what model to actually implement. In terms of the advantages of the grants-based model, we see that the grants-based model, which is based on local procurement, offers the opportunity for an expanded food basket because this actually gives us the opportunity to diversify the dietary practices and also ushers in some kind of significant behavior change. The model is also an opportunity for local agricultural capacity to be enhanced. And then, most importantly, this model offers stakeholders, policymakers, the opportunity to engage more intentionally in the structured demand process that offers a steady market for smallholder farmers. However, there is a downside of this model. The fact that this model still heavily depends on development partners for financing and capacity, even in terms of technical support, is really something that the school feeding community needs to strongly consider. Also, there is limited catchment area for food production. And because the question of how local is local when we are talking about homegrown school feeding. And we tend to see a kind of a localization for food production, for food procurement. And this in its own is a kind of a limitation because if the community is not able to produce what the school requires, then we are constrained to consume what is available in the community. There is also the idea of inconsistency in the provision of school meals. My research in Malawi has been able to show that there are certain periods of the year when the community is not able to produce what is actually needed in the schools. And so we tend to experience some degree of inconsistency. Next slide, please. Typically, these are the kind of food that farmer organizations supply to the school. It is not an exhaustive list, but permit me highlight here that in some of the communities in Malawi, when you talk about food, everyone is thinking about maize. But when you talk about diversity, no one is very willing to quickly dive into diversification. And so this is just a quick picture to say, as a result of the homegrown school feeding model based on local procurement, these are the kind of commodities that farmer organizations have been engaged in, and they are providing to the respective schools. Next slide, please. Talking about the community-based model, which is a more kind of localized, integrated perspective where community members are brought into the picture to drive the implementation of the school feeding program. We see that with this model, there is some degree of local ownership because the community members understand the importance of actually feeding the children. There is also learning by the communities as they lead the entire process and take responsibility in feeding the children at school. There is also enhanced stakeholder relationship, and we see that there is a sense of agency that surrounds community members as they come together to harness their efforts to provide what is needed. However, there is overdependence on these already fragile, vulnerable communities. When we look at communities that already are struggling to meet their food security needs, then we come in with this additional function. We see that it's actually a kind of reliance on people who are already vulnerable. And the vulnerability here, we are looking at communities that are already suffering from climatic shocks, the kind of problem-solving capacity. They don't have that capacity to solve their own problem. And so there is much that is needed to actually override the downside of this model. And there is also the lack of resilience, where we see kind of insecure technical support from partners, from the government. And we see that this actually requires a lot of skill tooling to make sure that communities measure up to the standards for this model to be effectively implemented. Next slide, please. What lessons are we drawing based on research and experience? Based on research in Malawi and what we are rolling out in Cameroon through Community Vision Group, we see that there is absolute need for the appropriation of this model. As I did mention from the beginning, homegrown school feeding is not a one-size-fits-all. And so my research has been able to come out with a decision-making algorithm where partners, stakeholders, actors involved in school feeding programs need to fully understand what conditions are required to implement what kind of models in what context. And so this is very important. And so there is need for an integrated approach, which is the case that we are driving across at the level of Community Vision Group. I will then hand over to my colleague to proceed from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilbert. Now, there's a plethora of evidence to show that behavior change has a role to play in overcoming some of society's most pressing challenges. But how do we change less desirable behaviors to adopt healthier ones when we know that behaviors are ingrained in our social norms and our everyday actions? There are many theories on behavior and behavior change, but many of these operate at the individual level. But we do know that in reality, individual level approaches have very limited success because they do not account for the wider context that drives behavior. In applying this to school health and nutrition, this will mean a realistic understanding of how and why people behave the way they do. Now, having established a specific behavior, which could be at the individual level, at the community level, at the policy level, then there will be the need for us to then apply behavioral tools to develop interventions. Now, this could start from using existing evidence to see which ways have been more effective. Now, the COMBI model of behavior is widely used to identify what needs to change in order for a behavior change intervention to be effective. It identifies 3 factors that needs to be present for any behavior to change. Now, these are capability, motivation, and opportunity. And this would require technical support. Therefore, for the successful implementation of school health and nutrition interventions, there is the need to promote behavior change in schools, in families, communities, at the regional, national, and decision-making levels. Why? And this cannot be achieved simply by informing people and leaving them to make their personal choices. Like I said earlier, it requires technical support. Thank you.
Thank you, Huber. And before we break for questions, I'm going to spend a few minutes focusing on school food policies in the UK. So for the UK and other high-income countries, policies around school food are mainly targeting health issues in childhood related to overnutrition rather than undernutrition, including high rates of obesity in the UK. About 1/3 of children are overweight or obese. Poor dental health is also an issue, and increasingly higher numbers of youth under 18s being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So if we look in the UK at the nutrition recommendations, there are a wide range of different nutrition recommendations, but the ones that are least likely to be met by not just children but adults are fibre and fish and sugar and fruits and vegetables. So not enough fibre, fish and fruits and vegetables, and too high levels of sugar. The other recommendations are more likely to be met, but still many of the nutrition recommendations not being met. In terms of trying to improve childhood nutrition, then targeting schools is a very successful approach. As we know, the vast majority of children attend school for several hours a day. And in the UK, if you look in the middle here, there's a long tradition of school food policies that goes back more than 100 years. And this started more locally with charities providing school meals for the poorest children, and then over time national policies were introduced and are now mandatory, and they've ebbed and flowed with changes in governments. In the UK, at lunchtime, younger children, so under 12s, either bring in a packed lunch that was prepared at home or they pay to have a school meal. And older children also have the choice of going off the school premises. If you look on the right, that currently the school meal standards promote healthy foods such as fruits and vegetables and restrict foods that are high in sugars, fats and salt. And there are also free school meals for children that are living in households on very low income. And the cutoff for eligibility, it has changed and has decreased in recent years, meaning that fewer children are currently eligible. And there still may be children that are living in poverty that are not eligible for free school meals. There's been a huge amount of research done in the UK and in other high-income countries on the benefits of high-quality school food, so having a school meal at school. And there's evidence that diet quality improves not just at lunchtime, but over the whole day for children who have a school meal compared with bringing in a packed lunch. We also know that offering cheap or free school meals increases the uptake of school meals. And countries such as Sweden offer free school meals to everyone, so don't have a cut-off at all, but all children between 5 and 16 have a free meal. And this varies across high-income countries. There have been reviews of different programs that are related to food at school and provide evidence of examples of good practice, such as programs to improve the quality of packed lunches, or more fruit and vegetables, providing a good quality school breakfast that can help cognition and learning, developing school gardens that pupils can work in, and helps their appreciation and knowledge of fruit and vegetables, and also improving the school curriculum, such as introducing sensory education and cooking in school. So we know that there's a lot that can be done. However, these are often not taken up by the majority of schools. So there'll be some schools that do things very well, and others that don't. And so these whole school approaches with good leadership at the school level and sufficient funding and a real interest in food, so that the leaders coordinate a broad range of different food-related programs, such as school gardens and sensory tasting. This is believed to be the best approach, but perhaps is not the most common one. So in summary, what have we learned over this 100 years of having school food policies in the UK? We know that good quality school food does improve diet and health of children, particularly those younger children under 12 years. However, policies are often implemented with varying degrees of adherence, so even national policies are often not optimal. But we know that there's better implementation if there's more accountability, such as school inspections. We also know that free school meals reduce inequalities in diet, but there are those challenges in selecting cutoffs for eligibility. Strong leadership within schools is really key to providing a joined up and consistent approach and a healthy school environment. So it's easy for children to have a healthy lifestyle while they're at school and for it to spill over into their behaviour at home. It's not just down to senior school managers, but qualified people on the ground are needed. And Japan is a good example of where funding is provided nutritionists in the majority of schools, and they design tasty and nutritionally balanced menus, and they're available to check feedback from children in schools. So thank you for listening, and I'll now pass on to Professor Basma Elahi for questions.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you to all the speakers who presented so far. So we have about 15 to 20 minutes at max to have a short discussion about what we presented before we call upon Professor Alan Jackson to help conclude this session. I'm going to be joined by my colleague Robert from the University of Sheffield to keep an eye on the chat, and you will be able to use your mic. So if you have any questions, either use the chat function or please put your hands up so that your mic can be opened. I can't. Okay,
there are some questions in the chat box.
Yeah, okay, I can see it now. Sorry, apologies. I was looking at the other chat. Okay, so we have some questions here. Let's start with Donald Bundy, Professor Bundy. Thank you for your comments. Great to see the focus on the nutrition. Would you like to use your mic to make to share your question, or should we just take your question? What steps are the societies taking to link the School Meals Coalition Data Monitoring Initiative with this work? Donald, do you want to come in there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Is that working? Okay, I'm kind of sort of reaching out in the dark here, and it's great. So that was a great session, and it was great to get that breadth of vision. My question really is, now we have the nutrition societies really showing strong leadership, setting up special interest groups around school food in the UK, but also internationally. How can you exert some of your power to do exactly what you specifically mentioned in your talk, to improve the quality of the data we have on nutrition from all these programs, so that governments can improve the quality of the data they use to make choices? And I just pointed out that there is a data monitoring initiative as part of the School Meals Coalition. They'll be speaking on Friday, and I wondered if you were how you were trying to link up with them to improve the quality of data reporting. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I'm wondering, Robert, are you
Yeah.
respond?
Yes. Can I respond? Yes. Thank you very much, Bandy. I think I really want to thank the Nutrition Society for giving us the opportunity to spearhead the special interest group. And this is our first of the series of activities that we'll be organizing. I think one of the actions that we want to take is to, first of all, have a discussion with the consortium for the global consortium for research on school health and nutrition, just to understand, to have a better understanding of how is the consortium is working in terms of data gathering, and how the special interest group members can fit into that. So I think it's a work in progress. One of the things that we'll be doing is, first of all, to have a discussion with that group, and also probably link up with in-country nutrition societies to see where we would work together to be able to address the gaps that we have highlighted in our presentations. I think one of the key things we have noted is the lack of data, and one of the activities that we are trying to do is to kind of do a data gap analysis to see where the gaps are. So, for example, we may have gaps in Africa that are different from those of South Asia. And then once we know that, then we'll be able to know what we will do to deal with these.
Great, that's great. Thank you, Robert.
Could I just respond to say that the Research Consortium for School Health and Nutrition would be delighted to meet with these special interest groups and to discuss how we can move forward. It's a key question. How do we really engage thought leadership globally? That really is the key question for both of us to try and solve. Thank you.
Alan, you had your hand up. Would you like to come in and respond or add?
Yes, I mean, I'd like to make a very simple observation, because we see a problem and we're very eager to jump to the conclusion. Francis spoke about quality data and quality assurance, and those of us who work in the health field are very well aware that you can collect very poor quality data very easily. But if you're using those data to inform life and death decisions or life and death policies, you really do have to be a bit more careful. By and large in nutrition, data that are collected within a research framework or a formalized survey framework have a reasonable measure of quality assurance. But data that are collected as a routine can be woefully inadequate. The reality is that for the school feeding agenda, we need data that are collected as a routine across a wide range of locations, and therefore there has to be a quality assurance framework for the people who are collecting the data to be able to demonstrate their competence and to ensure that the quality of the data are up to the standard necessary. That is not achieved in a short period of time. It has to be built up, but building it up well has multiple returns and great advantages. And that's one of the specific ambitions of the SIG of the Nutrition Society, to work in a structured way to develop that within countries and across countries, so that the data that are collected are not only comparable, but fit for purpose in terms of making important and difficult decisions.
It's really helpful. Thank you, Alan. Francis, you wanted to come in here.
Just a quick one, and I'm glad that Alan has come in with this. And we are trying to work, when I say we, the SIG is trying to work with the African Nutrition Society, and also to relate closely with NEPAD, who are the implementers for African Union, and also the various sub-regional communities like SADC, ECOWAS, so that we can be able to work collaboratively, singing from the same song sheet, to address the challenges that confront us at the school feeding level. To do this, what we are doing within the African Nutrition Society and also with the SIG is to set up a quality assurance framework where we are trying to measure some anthropometry. Now, in doing this, we are saying that, and Don, thank you so much for your question. What we are appealing to everybody is saying that we are carrying the packet to our new level. How can we move this right up to the head level? So any support, any funding would be appreciated so that we can collectively work to address this problem and gather the data and the quality control that we do need for Africa. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So we have a few questions between the Q&A and the chat. So I'm just going to go to, first of all, to Philippa Hardy's question in the chat because it links to what we've just been discussing. This is a question mainly related to high-income countries, but relevant to all. Given the latest recommendations provided by the Eat Lancet Commission on Global Food Systems on how we can feed 10 billion people while staying within the Paris Agreement biogeophysical planetary boundaries, how will food school meal recommendations fit with these recommendations to ensure they are not contributing negatively towards climate change? Would any of my colleagues offer a suggestion there? Charlotte, thank you.
Yeah, there's a move now towards not just looking at children's health, but health of the planet in school food, and Sweden has been leading the way in this, and they might have talked about it already earlier in an earlier session. So there's been, there has been a move in some countries to reduce meat and dairy, and certainly I think it will happen in many countries, certainly high-income countries in the next 10 years. So I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add on that.
No, I think that's fine. We just move to another question then. With all the survey studies by different partners, how do we all harmonise all the work to avoid duplication and miss some key elements? This would also minimise survey fatigue at country level. I think Alan's just spoken about this. Is there any further comments from any of my colleagues?
Yeah, that's right. So I think it's a very useful question about duplication. And I think that is where the 6 comes in, because we know that there are a lot of organizations and interest groups that are implementing activities or supporting governments to implement activities related to school health and nutrition. And we thought that it would be good to have a platform that will bring all these groups together, so that we work collaboratively, as I borrow Francis' word, so that we avoid the duplications that is, that is floating around. So yeah, so I think the SIG responsibility is to make this happen.
Great, that's great. Francis, you have a comment to add?
And also to let you know that SIG will not work in isolation from the regional economic communities and also from other NEPAD. In all of these things, other NEPAD is very much aware about the work that we are doing, and they'll be able to work collaboratively together with the SIG, with the African Nutrition Society and the Federation of African Nutrition Societies, so that there isn't any duplication of efforts. They're very much aware of this, and that's why even the questionnaire that was sent out was sent to the regional economic communities, so that we can work together collaboratively. Thank you.
And I think I would like to add that we've also been working with the Pakistani Nutrition and Dietetic Society. Robert and Alan presented the SIG to them in January, and we've just received an invitation to come and speak to them again in November. So, we are spreading the story of the SIG and willing to work with different societies to try to make this happen and make it very effective. I'm going to go to the questions in the Q&A function, and there's a question here for Gilbert. Gilbert, are you able to see that question? I can read it out for you.
Yes, I can see the question.
Okay.
Is from the anonymous attendee who is seeking to get how was the funding source obtained for community-based models. and how is that managed to consider the question of sustainability of the model. I want to begin by saying that these models, be it community-based or grants-based model, they are highly multi-sectoral, which means national governments, the different ministries are definitely involved, and funding entirely from the initial phase, from what I found out at the level of Malawi, funding is basically coming from development partners, and the national government leveraging on the much smaller resources that they have to make up for that community-based model. However, I think sustainability of the model very much rely on the technical support that these communities need. If these communities provided the much required technical support in terms of capacity, even improving on the different agricultural production techniques that they require to push on this agenda. I think that is the most significant part of the empowerment that the communities need at this stage. However, financial resources are shrinking, and the sustainability is yet another question that we still need to continue talking about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gilbert. Gilbert, there's a related question, which I think is related to yours, about how to ensure the willingness of the community to continuously take the lead of the programme. Do you have some suggestions there? Any further suggestions?
What I would say is the communities have the zeal to fully involve in this process, but the limitation is what is far beyond their control. The limitation in terms of capacity, the limitation in terms of finances, and we think that this is where development partners and the national government needs to get very intentional if they want the community to be fully involved in the integrated process.
Great, thank you. We have another question on evidence in relation to the quality of school meals. What evidence do we have on whether the quality of school meals has an effect on academic achievement, i.e. the nutritional quality? Robert, would you like to come in?
So thank you very much. I would say that the evidence is mixed, and I'm drawing evidence from the work of the World Food Program, which I was heavily involved. So we know that school feeding improves enrollment, attendance, retention, but academic achievements, like you said, we don't have data on quality, so which is one of the things we are discussing here. But the data that is there seems to point, especially in West and Southern Africa, that school achievement is improved following the implementation of school feeding. In East Africa, the evidence is mixed. So there are aspects where, there was no improvement, but then there were other settings where improvements was recorded. So I think, some of these studies were cross-sectional studies that we can't really use to draw conclusions. And this is where we have the issue of trying to strengthen monitoring and evaluation systems, because that's the only way. And Alan said here that we can only collect routine data, because that's what we will be able to monitor to track change. And so that is the task that we as nutritionists and nutrition professionals working in the area of nutrition needs to work in collaboration with those relevant bodies to address.
Okay, Charlotte, do come in.
Yeah, just like to say that I completely agree with everything that Robert said, but it looks like there may be more evidence for breakfast than meals at lunchtime, but a lot of, as Robert said, a lot of the data that we have is from lower quality studies, cross-sectional studies, rather than prospective studies or trials, whether they're randomized or not.
Great, thank you, Charlotte, for adding to that. We have time for another question before we move towards our concluding comments. Does anyone have a question or a comment to make, or any of those who posed questions, if you had anything further to comment on? We have the option to be able to open the mic should you wish to speak. Okay. We don't seem to have any questions. Robert, you just...
Yeah, so if there is no question, I want to encourage participants here to consider joining the SIG because that's the only way we can put ourselves together as a group to work with international bodies and governments to find sustainable solutions to all these problems that we are discussing here. So if you haven't joined the SIG yet, you can either email us directly or go to the Nutrition Society website and register your interest, because we have a pack of activities that would, and we know that everybody has a role to play. So so that's my appeal to participants here.
Absolutely, Robert. I think that's great. And please do put the email address in the chat function for attendees. Francis, before I come to
what I want to say is that Africa needs you. Whether you are a nutritionist, if there is a role that you can play in addressing the school feeding program, if there's a role that you can play in addressing the homegrown school gardens or whatever, Africa needs you. However minute your contribution is, that will go a long way to improve the healthy status of our school children. So please don't sit on the fence. Nutritionists, get in touch with your nutrition societies. If you cannot get in touch with your nutrition societies, get in touch with other networks. And both Kefewe, BB, we want to help you, link up to some of us, and we can work collaboratively with you to address the problem that confront our school children. We desperately need you to come, and we can work together in the trenches. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. And we have...
let me just say one more thing. Francis is talking as a leader in Africa, and this SIG is a global platform. So Francis is advocating for Africa. We have also Asians that are joining us today. We've been reached by people from Pakistan and Bangladesh. So please do become a member wherever you are. Don't let Francis make only the advocacy for Africa, because we want to know what happens in other parts of the world.
Yes, and we want you to be involved to help take this forward, because together we can probably find the right solutions. And at that point, I think it's up to hand over to Professor Alan Jackson, who will give us some concluding comments around the role of the nutrition extension, the school's nutrition extension professional. And over to you, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Basma. Hello, everybody. Delighted to be here with you. From the presentations we've heard and from the discussion that's followed, it's quite clear that where you have enthusiasm, school feeding agendas can be established to a very high standard. But it's equally clear that there are serious challenges when one thinks about sustainability, achievement of standards. But there are examples both within countries and across countries of better practice. And even within this discussion, it's clear that we're not very good at sharing those better practices. I'd like to start our point of departure from this publication from the United Nations Standing Committee on Nutrition, a discussion paper from 2017 entitled Schools as a System to Improve Nutrition. And in that document, as you can see on the right, there is a table which identifies groups of people of relevance: teachers, pupils, parents and parent-teachers associations, caterers, food vendors, farmers, etc. And so when I look at that, well, I can recognize schools as a system. I wondered whether or not nutrition is perceived as a system, because my understanding of the system is that there is a need for structure, a need for organization, and a need for leadership. When I look at the table and I'm unable to see a role for nutritionists, I feel a little concerned. Next slide, please, Basma. The reason I feel concerned is because the primary role of nutritionists is one of integration, communication, and facilitation. And for a long time, nutrition and nutritionists have sought to integrate cross-sectorally with some measurable success, integrating across health, education, food and agriculture. This is well spelt out by FAO as long ago as the 1960s as the particular role of nutrition. Next slide, please. And it's not only integrating across sectors, but it's also integrating across levels of organization, local, national, and international. Next slide, please. And so nutrition comes together in relationship to a person, an individual, a whole body. It's rooted within the integration of physics, chemistry, biochemistry, physiology, into an understanding of how that affects health, well-being, or illness in terms of the whole body. But the individual is also seen as a member of a family, a community, a society, at national and international level. And so the place where biological sciences and social sciences come together is the focus of nutrition. And this is a focus that's dynamic and changes in time. We had questions about sustainability and the whole question of feeding the planet. It's dynamic in relationship to ecosystems. It's also dynamic in relationship to life cycles and intergenerational change. And so all of the questions that have been raised ask for how do we better integrate our knowledge and understanding across different areas of interest. Next slide, please. Nutritionists communicate. They communicate learning, they communicate experience, and hopefully they communicate these two together as wisdom. A central part of their charge is to take knowledge and translate it to understanding, but understanding that is age appropriate and that people learn appropriately by doing, and they start by doing simple things well, and based upon doing simple things well, they can do increasingly more complex things so that it's progressive and additive. But all of this has to take place within a structure with systems, processes, and people which are organized for the appropriate and common purpose. Thirdly, nutritionists are facilitators. This is a facilitatory session because the heart of our challenge is, on the one hand, problem identification, and on the other, problem solving. If we don't identify the problem, we can't solve the problem. In fancy terms, this is called research, which is the structured approach to problem solving. And as has been said, problem solving is informed by evidence, and at the heart, data drives the evidence, but the data has to be of good quality and appropriate consistency across the piece. It has to have coverage, and that coverage has to have validity. In order to maintain standards, in order to achieve sustainability, requires monitoring and evaluation, and nutritionists sit at the heart of the monitoring and evaluation for this complex ecosystem. There's a need to be clear about the relevant exposures and the important outcomes so that cause and effect can be attributed appropriately, and that one can recognize both the direct and indirect flows from cause to effect. And ultimately, this is about people. It's about changing people's behavior. It's about better enabling people's behavior, and therefore the need to understand how that is achieved and the data that is required to better inform that process and that achievement. Next slide. And so we have argued for ourselves that nutritionists have a particular role to play, and we've captured that as a nutrition extension officer. And we've thought about and reflected upon the skills and the competencies required to do this. And within the professional levels of competency recognized for public health in the United Kingdom, and how these are applied by the Association for Nutrition, that represents an entry point at level 4, which would give responsibility for maybe 5 to 10, maybe more schools, but against predetermined criteria. The ultimate responsibility would be to be the delivery of school feeding, and acting as an intersectoral liaison for taking policy and applying it in action, acting as a community liaison so that the community can be best aligned with the ambitions and the challenges of the ambition, and to be supervisory for levels 1, 2, and 3, which are lower levels of professional skill and competency. Most importantly, they carry a responsibility for the quality of the data and the data collection and the entry of appropriate data into the database. And through that, to establish, through an established quality assurance framework, to put in place and maintain the monitoring and evaluation, the training and the continuation of the program, aspiring to better practice. We set this as our ambition, next slide, and that is what we have embarked upon within the special interest group. Robert has already invited anybody who wishes to join, because at the very heart of this, there has to be a conversation about what is the most efficient way forwards and how we can best work not only to understand our own situation and establish the better standards, but also how to work together and share experiences in a context appropriate form. So I really thank you for this opportunity to expose our ambitions to you, and look forward to a rich ongoing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. And I just want to finish by thanking the School Meals Coalition for the opportunity to present our work to you here today. And I hope that many of you will engage with us going forward. And just to thank my colleagues who are sat around the world and around it, particularly the geography of the UK, but around the world too, and for their contributions and their involvement so far today. Thank you so much. And we say goodbye. Thank you.